Karina Calderon, and I am the Deputy Director of the Lawrence Partnership. We are a nonprofit organization that we focus on the economic development of the city of Lawrence. This is our program in collaboration with the Lawrence Public Library and also with the Office of the Mayor, Brian De Peña. So tonight we bring you Dan McCarthy. Thank you for being here, Dan.
Well, thank you.
He is the Director of Planning of the City of Lawrence. And he's going to have a presentation for you so you can learn more about him and about his department. So Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank the Lawrence Partnership for hosting this and for all of you for attending to come hear my spiel about what we do in the planning department. My full title is the Director of Planning and Development. And development includes both community development and economic development. So we cover a lot of the social services and the development of programs for the city of Lawrence. We also control a lot of the development through permitting, and that is one of our aspects. So I did provide you a PowerPoint presentation with a by-the-book Wikipedia description of what urban planning is about, and I'll show you those, and then I'll explain to you what we really do. So we'll start off with urban planning and what goes into urban planning and what were the origins of city planning. And of course you can say it must have started when cities were developed. Well, it really started as a profession back in the turn of the century during the Industrial Revolution, when problems with cities began to mount and cities like Lawrence were developed that were actually planned cities. Lawrence was farmland on two sides of the Merrimack River, and a group of industrialists decided that it would make a great place to build a city. And that's why Lawrence has the grid that you see of many modern cities. The streets are all in squares. If you go to the towns, the surrounding towns, you see the streets meander all over the place because basically they followed the paths where the cows were herded and the sheep ran. And they went wherever they wanted. So it wasn't until urban planning that we started coming up with these type of designs. So the origin of urban planning, I just kind of explained to you what that was. And like I said, when Lawrence was founded back in 1840, it was considered a modern marvel of the nation. Lawrence has a lot of firsts. It was the first community that had a medical science center with William Wall Center now. It was also the first city in the country that had a water treatment plant. They had all indoor plumbing and modern sewage that didn't exist in any other city in Massachusetts. If you go to it now, because I've been down in those sewers, and you say that doesn't look very modern because it's all brick work and culverts and square boxes that aren't very efficient. But back then, that was the state of the art, and that's what Lawrence was. Lawrence was a planned city. There's your encyclopedia definition of urban planning: a process of developing and designing urban areas to meet the needs of the communities. Now, a lot of people say, can you really plan a city? Or do they just happen the way they are? And I'd say it's a mixture of both. How do you plan a city like Lawrence that is the center of immigration for 150 years in this country? So everybody who came from a new country would probably come to a city like Lawrence. So it was a constant turnover of citizens. So how do you plan for people with different cultures, different traditions, different languages, different meals they like to eat? So those are all the kind of things that go into it. There really is no way to plan a city other than by planning the infrastructure and the rules and ordinances to set it, to define it. But again, those are just markers to show the way. And the city is going to organically grow in ways that we're not sure of how it's going to happen. So there are 6 areas of urban planning that are traditionally defined by the universities, where they have colleges and have a degree in planning. So the first one is called strategic urban planning, and that is sort of the overall arching concepts of making a master plan. I've been with the city for 18 years now. I started back in 2006 with the city. Back then, we didn't have a master plan, and we still to this day don't have a master plan. I can remember when I got here, a master plan had been paid for and a consultant had been drawn and was drafting it up, and the city council saw the plan and was horrified by the idea of this plan and scuttled it, and since then we haven't had a master plan. So what we've done is we've gone with a bunch of smaller plans, what we call 5-year plans or comprehensive plans, handling little aspects of it, because I think the city council back in the 80s and 90s didn't like the idea of having a plan which defined how the city was going to be developed. So that is one of the little things that is, I'd say, kind of key element of how Lawrence operates. Land use planning. So this is what I started doing, and there's a definition up there, and it mainly deals with policy. But what it really, the real core of that is I work with all the different boards and commissions in the city. So I work with 7 boards. There's a planning board, there's a zoning appeals board, there's a conservation commission, there's a historic commission, there's a Prospect Hill Historic Commission. We have a redevelopment authority as well. So working with all these boards, the boards are made up of lay people, residents of the city, people like you and the people around you, and they sit on the boards and they make determinations about certain subjects, and which governs how we develop the city. So that's part of what we have like in the democracy. Lawrence is fortunate in some ways that we have a centralized planning. If you go to a lot of other cities and communities, all the boards are set up with separate, in separate departments, in separate little fiefdoms where they control their little small part of the city. And that's where you'll see lots of infighting come in the city. So you'd have a project come up in a city and everybody's on board, thinks it's a great project, and then it gets to conservation, and 5 people on conservation decide they don't like that project, or it goes to the historic commission, and the historic commission decides they don't like it. And what happens is it creates a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of delay. And I remember when I started with the city back in 2006, and people would say, "How long does it take to get a permit in the city?" And I said, "It should take about 90 days if you follow the rules. If everything's done by the book, you should have 1 hearing and you should get a permit and the special permit or variance in 90 days. And I talked to engineers and contractors and architects from other communities, and I say, "My God, it takes me 6 months to a year in any other community to get a permit." And I said, "Well, that's crazy, but that's a part of the project problem with over bureaucratizing these boards and giving too much power to the individuals." Master planning is, again, that is with the coming up with comprehensive plans that decide how we handle certain areas of development. We recently did a smart growth overlay on the downtown, which is a residential development program. So that is a master plan that's supposed to help us determine how housing is going to be done for the next 20 to 30 years in the downtown part of the city. So that's one of the things that we come up with every once in a while. The city doesn't have a master planner, or what do we call comprehensive planner. We have a land use planner and a plan director. Those are the 2 positions that are currently held. I am currently holding both those positions. Urban revitalization is a concept that came about in the late 50s and early 60s when a lot of cities, especially industrial cities, were getting overcome with pollution, with poverty, and neighborhoods were getting run down. So they came up with this idea of doing what's called urban redevelopment during the late 1960s between John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. And this city's had several areas where we've done urban revitalization. A lot of people say, does it really serve any purposes? And you can look at neighborhoods like in Boston, like the North End in Boston, which now is probably the highest value of land in Boston. But years ago, that was considered a blighted area. And there used to be a similar neighborhood called the West End that they tore down and made a bunch of apartments on it, and which is now, years later, not half as valuable as the property at the North End. So it makes you wonder sometimes if these concepts really are productive or whether it's just a matter of development and luck. Economic development, so that is another hat that I wear. I'm also the acting economic development director. The economic development works with businesses in commercial areas doing small business loans. We try to market the city to other areas. We try to draw in partners to come help develop the city. And we try and work with some of the major property owners in the city. An area like the Riverwalk with the Lapoli Company, the city would work very closely with them. We had got a grant back in 2008 to design development on Merrimack Street. And if you can see now on Merrimack Street, all the telephone lines have been put underground. There's old lights, traditional lights that have gone up, and the area's become a lot more productive and busy. And that's and it's currently about 600 people living there in what were formerly mills. Environmental planning is another area that the city department oversees, and again, that's something that I do. I am the conservation agent for the city, and I sit on the Conservation Commission as an advisor to the Conservation Board. So the Conservation Commission develops anything that would be near water or affects the environment, and people don't think of the city as a very wet area, but is actually, the city was founded basically because it sits on 3 rivers. That was the purpose of founding a city at these area, because the idea was that the 3 rivers at that time would power the factories and the mills that Lawrence grew around. And that's it. So that essentially is a background of what environmental planning is all about, but let me tell you a little more about myself. So I came to the city as an attorney. I actually, when I graduated from college, I was a school teacher for 3 years in Lawrence. I became an attorney, and I worked as an attorney for 18 years in Boston formally, and then I opened up and worked in an office in Lawrence where I did a lot of land use law, that in permitting. So I represented a lot of businesses. I left a lot of homeowners when they wanted to develop their property. They would come and hire me as an attorney, and I would go before the boards at the time. That's how I established all of my connections and all my relationships with the members of the city. I got to know the people in the inspectional services department. I got to know people in the fire department. I got to know people in the police department and other various areas of the city. So 2006, I was hired by, was Mayor Michael Sullivan at the time, and he was my first mayor. I've been through 5 mayors now, and he hired me as a land use planner, and I started doing that back then. And one of the things I noticed at the time was there was a real lack of communication between the different departments in the city, that they kind of all stuck to their own little area, and that they weren't called upon when a project was being developed. Most notably, that the fire department and inspectional services weren't called into the boards to comment and give their opinions about new developments, new construction. one of the biggest development changes in the city since I started was the idea of converting a lot of these mill buildings into housing. So now that were buildings that were industrial buildings and could probably no longer be used for industrial buildings because of their design, were being converted to housing, and that's been one of the major areas of growth. Another interesting point to when I started is I received a study from the state which said that Lawrence had a 0% build-out opportunity rate, that they didn't consider any type of development in Lawrence on any large scale possible because Lawrence had been completely built out at the time of that report. And that may be true because Lawrence at, I think it's 6.7 square miles, is one of the smallest cities, smallest communities in Massachusetts. It's actually smaller than that because I think 1 square mile of the city is a river. So it's really only 5.7 miles of land. And that is tiny. If you think about Haverhill, I think Haverhill's about 60 square miles. So compared to other communities, we're very small in land and we get very developed out very quickly. The opportunity, I think, for development, again, was in the mills and what we call infill housing. Because at the time, I know a lot of you can remember this, back in the 90s, there was a lot of fires, a lot of houses burnt down. When I started with the city, there were 900 vacant lots in the city that the city either owned or were in the process of taking. And in the 18 years since I've been here, we've converted over 800 of those to either new uses. Some people bought them for parking spaces for their homes, some people bought them for yards, some people bought some and built new houses on them. So that was one of the other projects where we were able to develop housing and develop uses for the community, even though we were being told by people from the outside that that wasn't possible. As I said, I've been here for 18 years now. I've seen a lot of development and 5 different mayors, and I don't know how many different city councilors. But it's always been interesting. I can tell you that. It's always at some point entertaining, but it's always been a pleasure and a rewarding part of my life working for the city. So I'd like to thank everybody, and I'd like to entertain any questions that you might have.